Welcome to the Pariah Nexus Ultramarine tier list. I'm brother Tobias, and this is how we're going to do it. I will rank all of these datasheets from the perspective of Ultramarines. So that means we can take the detachments in the codex, we can take all the Ultramarine specific characters from the codex, but we can't take anything else into account like Black Templars or Dark Angels or any of that. So let's go over the tiers. S tier are the units you take in almost every list. So everything that goes in here is pretty much an auto-include for most players. I think, personally, if a unit is good in 2 or more detachments, it should also go here. So just because a datasheet is not good in every detachment, especially if it's a detachment nobody uses, then it goes into S tier. A. Strong and frequently picked. Units in A are really good, and they might be incredible in one specific detachment, but you don't see them in every single list. But those are some of the best datasheets, and a lot of things are going to be in here. B tier is not bad, but you can do better. Those are strong units, they are perfectly fine. It is just usually they do something you aren't interested in, or there is a better equivalent, or maybe the game around these units just doesn't shape out the way it needs to shape out. But you can still take units from this category, especially if they work in your detachment, and that's fine. C. These units have a purpose, but are flawed. Those units have a clearly defined purpose. They do something. The problem is just whatever they do doesn't make up for the fact that something about them just doesn't work in any capacity. And last, we have D tier, which is unplayable. Those units are actively making your list worse if you take them, so you shouldn't take them. So let's get started. We have the Infiltrator Squad. Now, Infiltrators are a really good unit. They used to be auto-include. I have gone down on them a bit, just because in 10th edition, their rule isn't as impactful as it used to be in 9th edition, but there's nothing wrong with them. They have the basic Marine stat line. They have the Infiltrator's ability, so they can deploy outside of your deployment zone. Nothing can deep strike within 12 inches of them, which is the main reason you take them. And they also have a 6-up Fear No Pain, which means they are tougher than regular Space Marines. And you have a comms array, which means you sometimes get a command point back if you use it on them. So these guys used to be up here in 9th edition and at the beginning of 10th. In my opinion, they have gone down to A tier for 2 reasons. Number 1, Scout Squad's released, and I will talk about Scouts hopefully later on. Are Scouts in here? I sure hope Scouts are in here. Space Marine Scouts. If they are not, we just have to do something about that. And I have to take them into account later. Why are there no Scouts? I don't see Scouts. Anyway, so Scouts have replaced them as the infiltration unit for Space Marines. And Scouts are really, really good. So that's one thing. Number 2 is we have a problem with Pariah Nexus in particular, which is you want to use battle line units. And infiltrators are not battle line units. So if you take infiltrators, you slightly decrease your abilities in certain missions, and you absolutely decrease your chance of doing secret missions. So infiltrators, really good. You still take them if you are worried about deep strike in enemy reserves. So there's nothing wrong with them, but I think they're no longer S tier. The Librarian in Terminator armor. This guy is fine. There's nothing wrong with him, honestly. This guy is okay, but you can do better. He gives his units a 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks and mortal wound. No, just psychic attacks, excuse me. He gives a 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks, and he gives his units sustained hits, and he has a decent ranged attack. So, sustained hits always count, so it is a buff for any type of Terminator he leads, which is fine, and he does the spells, so he's okay. Not bad, but you can do better. The Chaplain on Jump Pack. I think this guy goes into the same category. This guy is completely okay. The problem is just you probably don't use him very much. Is that worse? The problem I see is you don't take big units of Jump Pack Space Marines. So he gives his unit +1 to wound, and he does some mortal wounds when you charge. I think in Ultramarines specifically, maybe this guy actually goes here. Like, this guy has a purpose. He makes your Jump Pack units, like Vanguard Veterans, just better. But the problem is, you don't take big units of Vanguard Veterans or Jump Pack Intercessors, so there he goes. We have a Lieutenant. Lieutenants are, I would say, here. Lieutenants are not bad, but you can do better. So Lieutenants give their units lethal hits and fall back and charge and fall back and shoot. And those are really good rules. The problem is the Lieutenant doesn't really join anything that is too good. He joins Blade Guard, which is the most relevant thing, and Hellblasters, but I think both of these units are not quite in the upper 2 tiers. I will talk about that more when I get to them. So that part is fine. He does carry some enhancements really well in the Firestorm. So I might end up moving him up, but I think he's right here because the Apothecary Biologis is usually a better carrier for the enhancements. He also has a problem in Ultramarine specifically where you can attach a Lieutenant with a Chapter Master, but Marneus Kelgar already gives you half of his rules in a better form. So if you take Kelgar and a Lieutenant, you overpay your points for his lethal hits ability, which I don't think is worth it. The Lieutenant in Reaver armor. This guy is unplayable. I will tell you why. His ability is useless. He increases the aura, I think, for the battle shocks that Reavers do, which is bad. But it is technically an improvement. So what does he do? He gives Reavers lethal hits, which is I guess it's good. Like, you can't complain about lethal hits. The problem is this guy doesn't have the deep strike keyword. So if you put him into a Reaver squad, the Reavers can no longer deep strike. So you just make your Reavers worse by taking the Reaver Lieutenant. That's why the Reaver Lieutenant is unplayable. The Captain in Phobos armor. This guy is here, but he is very close to being here. So this guy has the Captain ability, which is once per battle round you can use a stratagem for -1 command points for his unit. And he leads all the Phobos units and scouts. So he leads more units than all the other Phobos characters, because he can lead scouts. And he has the ability to redeploy 3 infantry units from your army. He does carry enhancements in Vanguard Spearhead, which you can do something with. The problem is his redeploy ability happens before you know who has the first turn. So for his price point, and the fact that the redeploy is just worse than it used to be, and the fact that his gun is not that great. It is a precision damage free bolter, but that's just kind of it. I'm putting him here. His flaw would be, his purpose is he gives you redeploy and free stratagems. The problem is he is way too expensive, so you will never take him. The Librarian in Phobos armor. I'm putting this guy right here. This guy is not bad at all, and he is a legitimately good tech option if you are worried about indirect fire and ranged combat. The Librarian in Phobos armor gives his units the 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks. He has some pretty decent weapons with his gun and his sword. And in addition to that, the Librarian in Phobos armor gives his unit the Lone Orb ability. Not quite, but it's the same thing. You can't shoot his unit outside of 12 inches. And if you combine that with Infiltrators, you have a unit that can't be deep striked on within 12 inches, and you can't shoot them outside of 12 inches. So this combination is completely immune to a enemy unit coming out of reserves. They can't charge you because they're outside of 12, and they can't shoot you because they're outside of 12. That's a really strong combination. The only problem is it is 170 points to take both. So that's something you can do. You can also take him with Eliminators and remain stationary with more safety, but I don't think that does something. So I'm putting him here. He has some serious options and a reason to be here, but I usually don't take him because he's just expensive. But it's not bad at all. If you find yourself in a metagame where he's relevant, then that is fine. The Gravis Captain, I will just put this guy down here because we only have one Gravis Captain to talk about. So, the Gravis Captain. This guy goes here. And I think he goes here. So the Gravis Captain is really, really good. You never take the rifle, in my opinion. You always take the second close combat weapon and the fist. Because he is a combat model and the bolt gun is not good enough to be on him. So, what does he do? Once per game, you can use a stratagem for -1 command points. That's good. And the Gravis Captain himself halves damage that is allocated to him. So if he gets hit by a damage 2 attack, you reduce that to damage 1. The Gravis Captain is deceptively really good if you don't attach him to a unit, because none of his rules actually require him to be in a unit. And in almost every detachment, you can put a enhancement on him that makes him a lot tougher than he normally should be. In the Gladius, you give him the Artificer armor, which gives him a 2-up save and a 5-up Feel No Pain, which makes him really tough. In the Anvil Siege Force, you can give him a once per game when he dies on a 2-up, he can stand back up with full wounds remaining. In the Iron Storm, you can give him a 4-up Feel No Pain, and in the Vanguard Spearhead, you can give him Lone Orb and Stealth, which makes him really difficult to kill with ranged attacks. And did I forget? Oh yeah, and in the Firestorm, Assault Force, you can give him the Adamantine Mantle to subtract 1 from the damage and turn every Melter and Torrent damage into damage 1. So that basically means you would halve the opponent's damage, because you always do multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. That means you get hit by a damage-free weapon, you halve that to 2, and then you subtract -1. That makes this guy almost unkillable. You basically have to come with mortal wounds in order to get rid of him. So that's why I'm putting him here. If you want to play him, he's really funny. I just think having an actual unit for the usual 90 to 95 points you spend on him is better, but I can totally see if you want to take this guy. He's really, really funny, and he's not bad. He's actually not bad at all. The Ancient. The Ancient goes to the top of C tier. Now, the Ancient gives your unit +1 OC, and the Ancient himself has a 4-up Feel No Pain against everything while on an objective marker. The Ancient has one saving grace. So the flaw of the Ancient is he doesn't actually do anything. He is a character model, so he goes up for Assassinate. He doesn't have any damage abilities. +1 OC is a fine buff, but it's not really that good. But the one thing that keeps this guy out of unplayable, in my opinion, is that he is really tough to kill while on an objective, so he can hold your home field objective by himself with a 4-up Fear No Pain. And you can buy this guy for 50 points. An Ancient is really cheap. You don't need to attach him to one of your units. You can just put him on your home objective and leave him there. Now that is worse than it used to be because he's not a battle line unit, but I think that keeps him out of unplayable, and it makes him maybe, if you have exactly 50 points and you don't want to take a unit of Voidsmen or Henchmen from the Imperial Agents, you take the Ancient. Assault Terminators. These guys go in C tier. I think before the Librarian. I think these guys are fine. So they deep strike, they have 4 wounds a model if you take the hammers, and you should always take the hammers in my opinion. And the hammers have death wounds. What these guys really want is a reroll wounds effect, which they unfortunately don't get outside of First Company, and First Company is really bad. It is the worst detachment in the Codex, so that's a shame, but I think on the merit of their stat line, you can take 10 of these guys in Vanguard and use Blade-Driven Deep on a Terminator character to infiltrate them forward, which is fine. You can justify a brick of them in maybe Anvil Siege Force to give them a 6-up Feel No Pain, and then use the fallback stratagem to charge and fall back, charge and fall back. So that's something you can do. I think these guys are okay, but they are not quite there yet, because they are not as useful in the other detachments. And they have nothing against mortal wounds until we get to something else. The Vindicator. The Vindicator gets to be in A tier. Why? Because the Vindicator does a lot of damage in Ironstorm. Some people take a Vindicator or 2 in the Gladius. I can respect that. I'm personally not a fan, but the Vindicator is pretty decent in Ironstorm. So the Vindicator is a really tough vehicle. It has 11 wounds, a 2-up save, toughness 11, and it has a strength 10, AP 3, D6 damage gun, which is really good. And his special rule is you can shoot the gun into combat, even though it's a blast weapon. So this thing is actually really high damage for not that many points at 170. And with the built-in rerolls in Ironstorm, you make this this tank a bit more consistent. So I completely rate it. I think it's pretty good. A regular Land Raider. I think this guy goes to the bottom of B. The regular Land Raider carries only 12 models. You know what? I think this guy goes to the top of C because of that. So the regular Land Raider carries 12 models. That means you can't run a 6-man Gravis unit with a character. You can, after you drive, you can get out and still charge. The problem I have with the regular Land Raider, even though it's not that expensive at 240, it has 2 last cannons with 4 shots in total, which are anti-tank. The problem is the heavy bolter in front is not as good as the assault cannon for the 2 we talk afterwards, and the Land Raider only moves 10 inches instead of 12 for the other 2. So I think those are the flaws, the transport 12 and the 10-inch move, that keeps it in flawed. It has a purpose, it still does a thing, but it's not as good as the other 2. The Crusader. The Crusader genuinely sneaks into the bottom of B for me. Now the Crusader has a different flaw as the normal Land Raider, which is it doesn't do any damage because it only has anti-infantry guns with... It has a bunch of bolters which probably don't do anything. Whatever. However, the Land Raider Crusader is only 220 points for a really, really tough vehicle. With toughness 12, a 2-up save, and 16 wounds. And the Land Raider Crusader is faster than the Land Raider. It moves 12 inches, it has the grenade keyword, and it transports 16 models. So you can, in theory, fit 6 Gravis Marines with 2 characters. Because that's 8 times 2, that's 16. So that's honestly good enough for me to put it here. I think the Land Raider Crusader is better than you would think, just because it's so cheap. If it was the same cost as the Land Raider, I would put it down. The Land Raider Redeemer. This guy goes into A tier. Now, the Land Raider Redeemer got recently nerfed. It went up 25 points, and I think it is still good. It got slightly buffed, because the Land Raider Redeemer can move easier with the new pivot rules in Pariah Nexus. And if you only took one Redeemer, I think you are fine in terms of making the points off. The reason the Land Raider went up was because people were running 2 to 3 of them, because the Redeemer is really good. So what makes the Redeemer different from both of these? It basically erases both of their flaws. It is faster and has better weapons than the normal Land Raider. So it is faster, it moves 12 instead of 10. It can carry more models, it carries 14, which is enough for a unit of 6 Gravis Marines and a leader. And unlike the Crusader, the Redeemer has damage, because it comes with 2 flame cannons, which are 2d6 plus 6 shots, and they hit automatically with ignore cover. That's pretty good. That is genuinely really good. It is scary in Overwatch, it is really tough to kill, and it costs 65 points more than the Crusader, which is a scout squad. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's really good. It used to be here, in my opinion, because the Gladius would always take it. But I think it is still here. It is one of the main units in Gladius, and I think you still take it. The Whirlwind. The Whirlwind is unplayable. The Whirlwind is, I think, 180 points. It is an indirect firing tank with a very inconsistent shot count. It only hits on 4, so you can't really buff it with any +1 to hit modifiers for indirect, and it just doesn't do enough damage. It is just bad. You could technically say it shoots indirect and should be here, but I'm putting it down here to make a point. The Drop Pod. The Drop Pod allows you to deep strike a unit on turn 1. The Drop Pod drops down, your unit gets out, and then your unit can shoot, but it can't charge, because it just left a transport. The Drop Pod is interesting. I think I'm putting it right here. The Drop Pod has a purpose, because nothing else in your army outside of the Stormlands can do a turn 1 deep strike, but it has some flaws. Flaw number 1, the Drop Pod only holds 10 models, so you once again have an issue with the leaders that can fit into the Drop Pod. And second, the Drop Pod is a vehicle, but it doesn't move. So once the Drop Pod lands, it can no longer move. That means if your opponent can charge the Drop Pod, they essentially are immune to shooting. Because you can't shoot at something that's in combat with one of your friendly units, unless that enemy unit is also a vehicle. But that is genuinely a big deal, especially if your opponent has fall back and shoot. They can basically just fall back, shoot you, charge the Drop Pod. In your turn, they can't be shot. Then they fall back, shoot you, and so on. So the Drop Pod has a serious downside in that regard, but it still does something pretty unique, so I'm not putting it into unplayable. I think it does something, it just doesn't do it very well. Also to note, in Ultramarines, the Drop Pod is even worse than in other chapters, because we have a named character who gives us a similar ability to deep strike something. So the Drop Pod doesn't need to exist. The regular Dreadnought. This guy is also unplayable. The regular Dreadnought is, I want to say, 140 or 150 points, something like that. He comes with a wide array of really mediocre weapons, like a twin last cannon and a fist or something. And his rule is he gives infantry units reroll once to hit in shooting and combat. And that's just not a good enough rule for a model that moves 6 inches. It's just not good enough. But that's it. So it's just not good enough. It's too old. It is too slow. It doesn't do enough damage. You will never take this. Assault Centurions. These guys are going to be contentious because I will put them in B tier. And I will put them here. Maybe. I think I might actually put them here. So here's what you do with Assault Centurions. Assault Centurions are the cheapest but still most impactful unit you can put into a Land Raider Redeemer. They fulfill a role not many things can do, which is they have a good anti-vehicle melee weapon, which doesn't exist in this edition very much. So they hit pretty hard in combat. If they are in a Land Raider, they don't suffer from their bad speed. And they are pretty self-sufficient because they have... I want to say they get sustained hits 2 against vehicles. Is that what they do? Is that sustained hits 2? Against vehicles, and they have twin linked with a really high strength, something like strength 12. There they are, Centurion Assault, strength 10, okay. Strength 10 with twin linked and damage free, and they gain sustained hits 2 against monsters and vehicles. So these guys are melee anti big model units, which is pretty good. And they also come with a twin linked a twin linked melter or flamer. And they can have the grenade keyword, which is always good. They appreciate advance and charge in the Gladius. You could do some funny things like rapid ingress them with Uriel Ventris in the Gladius. You see these guys in the Firestorm detachment because they come with a melter or a flamer. And both of these weapons really like the +1 strength, because flamers with strength 5 and twin linked are now pretty decent at killing some infantry. Melters with strength 10 and twin linked are pretty good at wounding vehicles, and assault helps them to advance and shoot. So I'm putting them here because they're genuinely not bad, but you can usually do better. Centurion Devastators. These guys go straight here, I think. Yeah, I think you see infiltrators more often than Centurions. So Centurion Devastators are here because they are good in one detachment, and that is the Vanguard Spearhead. In the Vanguard Spearhead, you have a stratagem called Guerrilla Tactics, which allows you to put a unit from the table into reserves. That unit is usually a unit of 6 Centurion Devastators with twin last cannons and Centurion missile launchers, which are strength 9, AP 2, damage D3 missiles with D3 shots and blast. So these guys are really good at killing vehicles with their last cannons. They are really good at killing infantry, and their only flaw is they are slow. But one of the detachments, the Vanguard Spearhead, completely solves the speed problem for them. And that's why they are here. They can't be an S tier because I don't think they're good in any other detachments. Some people have run 3 of them in a Land Raider, but I don't think that's a good... I personally don't like that very much. That's how it is. Devastators. Devastators are bordering on unplayable, but I'm putting them in C tier. So they have a purpose, which is your Devastators can carry heavy weapons. Which means you can get some long-ranged weapons to shoot your opponent with, which is a purpose. The flaw is Devastators need to be stationary because they hit on force, and hitting on force is just not good, and you can't be stationary in 40k because you have to move. In Anvil Siege Force, if you are stationary, you also get +1 to wound with all of their weapons, which is pretty good. Graph Guns really like the Gladius detachment for the +1 AP stratagem. Or the Ignore Cover, depending on what turn it is, so... They like that, that's pretty decent. The problem is just they are too expensive, they don't do enough damage, and if you try to set up some combos with a Razorback, you're paying twice as much as for a much better unit later on. So that's something here. Tactical Marines. These guys are going in C, but I'm actually putting them at top of C. So Tactical Marines are 10 Space Marine bodies with no redeeming qualities. They come with 1 heavy weapon, 1 special weapon, and some gimmicks on the Sergeant. The special rule of the Tactical Squad is, before the game begins, you split the 10-man squad into 2 5-man squads, if you want to. That's genuinely not bad in Ironstorm, because you get 2 weapons that benefit from the reroll you get in Ironstorm. These guys are battle line, so they do score the new missions. So there's worse things you can do than, for example, you take a Tactical Marine squad, you put 5 models with bolters on your backfield objective, and then you put 5 of them with the 2 good weapons and the Sergeant into reserves. And then the Sergeant and the unit pops out and they do some damage with other units. And they are only 140 points. So that is also pretty good. I think these guys are not unplayable. But I think just because the points don't work out that well. Because 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors are only 10 points more. And Assault Intercessors have an actual rule. So I would say these guys are not quite in strong choice, but I think they are better. They used to be like down here, but now they're like top of C. Vanguard Veterans. These guys are not good. I'm putting them right with the Chaplain. I think these guys go together if you want to take them. The problem is First Company is a bad detachment, and these guys would probably be good in First Company, with -1 damage and +1 to hit and reroll wounds, which they would appreciate. The problem is just they are very expensive. They don't do enough damage for their cost. They have a 4-up invuln, which is nice, but I think they are just worse than Assault Pack Intercessors. And that's what it is. Robute Gilliman, the Primarch. The Primarch used to be really, really good at the beginning of 10th edition. Then he got more expensive. Then Oath of Moment changed to no longer reroll wounds. And then he lost the ability to do two stratagems for free. It had to be 2 battle tactics. Since then, he has gotten a bit better. Instead of doing 2 stratagems, you are now able to do 1 stratagem, but it can be any stratagem you want. It doesn't have to be a battle tactic. Which he appreciates, because Heroic Intervention is now 1 command point, and Primarchs can now walk through walls in the same way infantry can. So that makes Gilliman a bit better. So what does Gilliman do? He has a 2-up save. You can do a free stratagem for 1 unit in 12, or you can get a second Oath of Moment, or you can get an aura of +1 OC and reroll leadership, which is genuinely not a bad aura. I have used that aura a lot in the beginning of the edition. And I should have used it against Chaos Knights in that 1 battle report I made. So that's interesting. He hits like a brick in combat. He has a damage 4 fist with 7 attacks. He hits on 2s. He's not bad. The problem is he's just not good enough because he's so expensive and he doesn't have any defense against mortal wounds. His most important rule is when he dies on a free up, he gets back up with 6 wounds, which is unfortunately just not as reliable as a 2-up. I just wish it was a 2-up. I wish it was either a 2-up or it was how do I say it? He was fewer points. I would pay less for him. I think Gilliman goes like here right now. I think he is finally playable again, but he's just not good enough for the upper 2 tiers. You can probably make it work. He got better. He isn't useless anymore, but he's still just so expensive, and you can probably just build a better list without him. Apothecaries. Apothecaries are similar to the Ancient. They're really cheap. If the Apothecaries unit dies, you get a command point, which is fine. And at the end of the at the beginning of the command phase, you can revive a dead model in the Apothecary's unit. The problem with this guy is he doesn't really have anything he wants to join and revive. You can do Hellblasters. The problem is Hellblasters are just fine. They're not awesome. And that adds another character to the unit. I guess he works well. I think the best use case for the Apothecary is in Hellblasters. If you take a Lieutenant with Fire Discipline, and you take the Hellblasters in Gladius, and then you put the Apothecary in, you revive a model, and then, because the Hellblasters usually lose a few models when they shoot due to the overheat, and he revives them. So, in theory, that works out. So, I think this guy goes, like, over here. I don't think he is bad. He doesn't really have a flaw. There's nothing wrong with him. It is just that he doesn't join anything that's too bad. But Hellblasters do exist, and I will do my diligence here and put him here instead of down here. Captains. Captains are really good. Captains, I think, are in front of the Redeemer. Yeah, I think they're here. Captains are really good. Once per game, a captain can get +3 attacks and devastating wounds. That is an incredible rule, because in a lot of detachments you can get an enhancement that buffs the damage output of a captain. So if you give the captain a Power Fist and the Honor Vehement in the Gladius, he goes to 6 attacks with Strength 9. And if you activate the Assault Doctrine, he goes to 7 attacks at Strength 10. And if you activate Finest Hour, he goes to 10 attacks at Strength 10 with devastating wounds. So this guy is really good. He likes Advance and Charge. He likes. He also gives your unit a free stratagem, which is still really good. You used to be able to take multiple captains. Nowadays, I think you only take 1 captain. I think 1 captain is fine. And that's the big question. So what do we say? I think A tier is correct. I think, yeah, he's good in other detachments too. Firestorm, you can give him the Ignore Modifiers enhancements. In First Company, you could be using the -1 damage for 0 command points, which is pretty good. And just about any detachment usually has a good stratagem for 1 command point you just want to spam. So I think the captain goes into A tier, because the captain is really good, especially in the Gladius. A chaplain. Chaplains give their units +1 to wounds. They give one of your units within 12 inches a once per game. You are no longer battle shocked, which is honestly pretty nice. And the chaplain gives his units leadership 5, which is the best leadership you can have in the game. I think the chaplain goes here. Honestly, I think the librarian should be in front of the... should he be? I think it's close. I think the chaplain should be, like, here. The chaplain is basically, if you can't afford a captain, you take a chaplain, in my opinion. But there's nothing wrong with a chaplain. A chaplain gives you a unit +1 to wound. I think in Blade Guard that is genuinely pretty good. I like that better than the Ancient for +1 attack. And you just don't pay any command points. So basically, if you have a captain already and you want to take a second melee unit, I think a chaplain is pretty good. I think the chaplain is a bit underrated. Librarian. The librarian gives his unit a 4-up invulnerable save and the 4-up feel no pain against psychic attacks. This guy goes... I think he's worse than the Apothecary. And pretty much for the same purpose. He makes a unit more durable. The problem is he doesn't join anything you want to make more durable. He doesn't have synergy with the Hellblasters because his invuln save doesn't prevent them from dying, so that's one thing. And there isn't really anything you want to give a 4-up to. You can fire his psychic gun out of a transport, which is not terrible. There's nothing wrong with a 4 invuln. I just think he's going here. Like it's not a bad set of rules. Should these two be 1 tier lower? I honestly think that the fact that he doesn't have anything to join while the Apothecary kind of has something to join is a good enough difference. I think that the Librarian goes here. If Desolation Marines ever get better again, he might be on the return here. Aggressors. Aggressors are really good. I'm putting aggressors behind infiltrators, I think. So maybe in front of infiltrators, maybe behind. Aggressors are really good. They used to be really, really good, but they got more expensive, and now they're a bit tough to justify. They are usually taken in the Vanguard and in the Gladius. In the Vanguard, they can infiltrate, so you can charge with Calgar, and you have a melee unit in an otherwise ranged detachment. They also really like the Gladius because you can give them fire discipline, and you just have a hail of shots to hit your opponent with. The reason why I'm not putting them in S tier is because aggressors are very hungry for resources. You need command points to fill their stratagems, and they usually want Oath of Moment in order to do all of their combos. Now, I will briefly mention something I personally really like, but other people don't, is the Flamestorm aggressors. If you don't take them with the Bolters and you take them with the Flamers. The Flamers are d6 plus 1 shots, so you're losing about 3 shots worth of output per aggressor, and they only work within 12 inches. However, Flamestorm aggressors hit automatically because they have torrent weapons, and being able to shoot something without needing Oath of Moment and then still having a decent melee punch is genuinely pretty good. I personally really like Flamestorm aggressors, but most people play Boltstorms in Gladius and Vanguard, so I'm putting them right here. I think they're good, they're just not perfect. Reavers. Reavers are unplayable. They don't have a purpose because their rule is bad. They have Deep Strike, which means they can do mission play, but there is another unit for 85 points with Deep Strike, which I just think is better than Reavers. So they're too expensive, they don't do anything you are interested in, and they're not even battle line, which makes them even worse. So Reavers go right down here. Hellblasters. So I always put Hellblasters like here, but if I have to be objective, they are definitely like here. Yeah, Hellblasters are here. They, just like aggressors, they really like the fire discipline enhancement. They do some pretty interesting, they are like an in-between for aggressors and eradicators, and they aren't as expensive as aggressors anymore. They used to be more expensive, but now they're cheaper, I think. Let me check that quick. How much is aggressor? How much are Hellblasters? I think it is. Is it 200 for 10? I hope it is. Please don't let it be 220. But I think it is 200 for 10. Hellblaster squad. It is 230. That is cheaper than aggressors, to be fair. So it is cheaper than aggressors, but it is an in-between point. The problem is these guys are really fragile, so if your opponent kills them, they die. But the good thing is, if they die, they shoot back. So they can be a headache to play against. So I'm putting them here because people like them and people use them. I just want to acknowledge they're not as good as aggressors for the same role, which is the fire discipline unit. In other detachments, I don't think they're good at all in Ultramarines. We don't have an Azrael to give them some buffs. You can give them ignore modifiers in Firestorm, which also gives them strength 10, which goes them to strength 9, which is better, with a +1 to wound stratagem. But they get assault even though they still have assault. In Anvil Siege Force, they're heavy. So if you ingress them in with Uriel Ventris or out of reserves, you get +1 to wound. which is pretty good. So they go basically here, and their package is the Lieutenant and sometimes the Apothecary. And then you have a unit that is completely respectable. I just don't think it is the most optimal choice. Intercessor squads. This one is going to be really annoying for me because I have to put them here. And I really don't want to put them here. I really... Can I justify it to myself to put intercessors here? This is the tough one, chat. This is a really tough one. So intercessors are a battle line unit, and they make objectives sticky. That is usually good enough to keep your home field safe, because if your opponent does a deep strike and kills them, you still hold your home objective. So your opponent has to wait until turn 3 before they can take your home objective off of you via reserves. That is genuinely a good rule. These guys are 80 points, so they're pretty expensive for what you get, because they don't do any damage. They do 0 damage, don't even think about it. I think because they are so good in Vanguard, I'm putting them in 8 here. But it is pretty close. They could easily be like here, in my opinion. They could easily be here, but you need a battle line unit to prevent your opponent from scoring War of Attrition. The mission rules are not that important, but War of Attrition is, and if you run them in Vanguard, you can put them into reserves and then come back, and then you have a battle line unit in their deployment zone. I'm not feeling great about it, but I'm putting them here. Just because they're battle line. If they weren't, they would be with the Land Raider somewhere, because they're not great. Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Redemptor Dreadnoughts are really interesting. They are an incredibly durable vehicle with a 2-up save and -1 damage. They have a plasma cannon, which is genuinely pretty good. It is D6 plus 1 shot with blast and damage free. And then it has a bunch of other shots it can fire into combat. So what does the Dreadnought do? So the Redemptor is really tough. It isn't slow. It moves 8, which is fast enough. It likes the Iron Storm for rerolls. It likes the Gladius for advance and charge. Sometimes it really doesn't. The melee profile on this thing is pretty bad, in all honesty. It's not great. Because it's only AP2. So that's something. It is really tough until it isn't. That's always my problem with Redemptor Dreadnoughts. If you play against Orcs, or World Eaters, or even certain like Tau lists, or Dark Eldar, these things are genuinely really difficult to kill for your opponent, because their damage stacking with Armor of Contempt and cover and -1 damage is really high. But the moment you play against something like Eldar, or Sisters of Battle, or Chaos Knights, they will just fall apart in seconds. I'm putting the Redemptor Dreadnought behind the Lieutenant, because it is a good model. It is just a very unreliable model in a blind pick. Because if you pair against Chaos Knights, your Redemptor Dreadnought is really bad. That's unfortunately what it is. That's just unfortunately how it is. But sometimes they're really good. Orcs, for example, just hate these guys. They can't really do anything about them. The Brutalis Dreadnought. I think the Brutalis Dreadnought goes into B tier as well, but I think it's a bit lower. I think it's around the same as Guilliman. I'm putting it in front of Guilliman because it's cheaper. So the Brutalis Dreadnought basically trades the range damage and the -1 damage ability from the Redemptor for being 35 points cheaper and for having more consistent melee, and everything this thing has is twin-linked. So this thing is a bit more reliable outside of Oath of Moment, which I like. It really likes Advance and Charge in the Stormlands and in the Gladius, and its ability is whenever it charges, it has a decent chance to do some mortal wounds. You can combine this with Tank Shock. The Tank Shock is worse than it used to be, but it's still pretty good, honestly. And it does threaten some things in close combat, because at least it's twin-linked. It has the same bad profile as the Redemptor, but at least it's twin-linked, so that's something. It's not bad. It's not bad. I'm putting it here. I'm usually not taking it because I'm not interested in a melee unit, but it's still tough enough and it's cheap-ish. So I'm putting it here. I think it's pretty good. Inceptors. These guys go right here. I think I'm putting them in front of Centurions and in front of Aggressors. Honestly, I'm putting them in front of the Infiltrators too. Maybe? Yeah, I think I would rather have Inceptors than a Redeemer. In honesty, they're right here. I think the Captain has them beat, but it's close. Honestly, Inceptors are really good. So what do Inceptors do? Inceptors are pretty expensive. They are 3 models for 130 points. But they come with either a sustained hits 2 heavy bolter or a damage-free twin-linked plasma gun. And their ability is they can deep strike within 3 inches. These guys single-handedly swing certain matchups. You can easily play against orcs or world eaters, armies that want to push into the center, and you can just deep strike behind them, kill their home field, and then hold their home field. Because they can't really afford to turn around and get you. And then you just score a bunch of 3 points with them. Their damage is genuinely pretty good, because Twin Link damage-free plasma is really good on the plasmas. Losing models to hazardous hurts, but it's not that bad. And the bolters are also pretty good, because the bolters will on average kill any lone op character, like a Calidus assassin, a lieutenant, something like a Hexmark or something. And they will usually kill it with the bolters. Even without Oath. If you have Oath, you guarantee it, but it should also work without Oath. And they're really good at killing. Like, you can rapid ingress the bolters, you can charge, you can fly at a unit of cultists, you kill 8 of them in shooting, and then you charge the remaining 2, and now you're holding their objective. That's pretty good. So I think Inceptors go here. They're also really good in the Vanguard Spearhead, because after you deep strike, you can go back into reserve, and then deep strike again, which is another 3-inch deep strike. And they also enable a lot of really interesting plays with rapid ingress, because with the 3-inch away rule, you can deep strike on an objective your opponent is on and take it away, or you can prevent a transport from getting wrapped by a bunch of models, so you can still get out. What else? You can rapid ingress into a charge lane, so if your opponent stands like 7 inches away from your unit, you drop them in 3 inches away, and now your opponent has to charge the Inceptors instead of whatever they wanted to charge. And they're expensive, so I can't put them in S anymore, but they're really, really good. Inceptors are incredible. I still take them in every list I build, but not everyone does that. But I think they're almost in S tier. And something to note, the Plasma Inceptors are assault weapons, so if you take them in the Stormlands, you can give them +1, you can give them sustained hits 1 for 1 CP. So if you were ever interested in the Stormlands, which I doubt, you could take 6 Plasma Scepters and go off. Here we go. We have a vacant slot in this tier list, and we are about to fill it. Marneus Calgar is incredible. Marneus Calgar is absolutely incredible. He is probably the best datasheet in the Codex. If I had to pick, Marneus Calgar is incredible. Marneus Calgar gives his unit advance and charge, advance and shoot, fallback and charge, and fallback and shoot. Marneus Calgar also gives you 1 extra command point for as long as he's on the battlefield and alive. And that means Calgar doubles the amount of stratagems you can use in a game of 40k. Or not really. He increases it by by a third, because you get 2 CP in a battle round, but you get the idea. You get an extra command point, you don't have to throw away a secondary card to get it. And in Pariah Nexus, scoring your cards is really important, so you can even use the Calgar command point to draw a new card and try to score a new card, just to get ahead on victory points. Calgar can lead almost any unit in the book. He can lead aggressors, he can lead Blade Guard veterans, company heroes, Eradicator. He can lead a lot of units, and this is where the Victrix card come in. Calgar comes with 2 friends, and the 2 friends give him a 4-up Feel No Pain while one of them is still alive. But more importantly, both of these models are not characters, so you can put damage on them, even if they're in a unit. They're not character models. You can put damage on the Victrix card. And the Victrix card have a 2-up save and a 4-up invuln. That is basically the same thing as if you buy a librarian for a unit of aggressors. Almost. You don't get a 4-up on everyone, but you get 2 models with a 4-up save and a 2-up armor save, and they can tank damage for your unit, which is really, really good. I think Manios Calgar is in S tier, and he is a consideration in every single detachment except for the Stormlands. In the Stormlands, he doesn't do anything, because, rules-wise, I mean, because you already get Advance in Charge. You don't get Assault, you get Advance in Shoot, so you don't get access to the Stratagem. But the Stormlands is bad, so who cares? Because he's still good in the Anvil Siege Force, because the Anvil Siege Force gives heavy to his unit. They have good stratagems, and because he can get into Gravis units, you can put him into the same unit that has the 6-up Feel No Pain, which is really strong. You can put him into the Firestorm, so you lose Advance and Shoot, so because it doesn't stack. But in the Firestorm, you can do some stuff with the transport, get in, get out. The Firestorm really lacks sources of fallback and charge and advance and charge, so he's probably good there too. And he's obviously amazing in Vanguard and Gladius. In the Vanguard, he's especially good because he's your only source of advance and charge and fallback and shoot. And because he is a chapter master, he can join with another character and potentially get some of the enhancements like Fire Discipline or Infiltrate. So S tier, Manios Calgar, absolutely the GOAT. The Razorback. The Razorback is... honestly, it's probably unplayable. The Razorback has exactly one combo. You put the Devastators in the Razorback, and when you get out and the Razorback shoots something, the Devastators get reroll wounds against that unit. But that is that combination is almost 350 points, and it's just bad. Like a 300 point unit combination that gives you rerolls on 4 last cannons. That's just not good. The guns on the Razorback are also bad. It's not tough. It's not fast. Like it's fast enough, but it's not great. In a similar vein, I'm putting the Rhino straight in front of the Razorback, and this is pretty interesting because in a vacuum the Rhino is actually pretty good, because the Rhinos across 40k are amazing because Rhinos are cheap. They are a model you can put on the board, and you can shoot out of the hatch. You can set up next to a wall and you can charge. The problem is, nothing in this army can get into the Rhino. The only units that can get into the Rhino are Tactical Marines and Devastators, and I'm not interested in these units enough to take a Rhino. And if you take an empty Rhino, it just explodes, so that's not very good. The Predator Annihilator. This is the one with the last cannon. I'm putting this guy with the Devastators. I think it goes ahead of them because of Ironstorm, but Yeah, basically you get a Predator tank with a bunch of last cannons. The last cannons in the tower are actually pretty decent. They're D6 plus 2 instead of D6 plus 1. But the rule of the Annihilator is you get to reroll once for damage rolls against vehicles, which is really specific. You are lucky if that comes up once per game. And because of that, I'm putting the Predator Annihilator here. The Predator Destructor is honestly here. It's an A team. It's an A tier. The Predator is really cheap. It is 130 points. It gets +1 AP against infantry. The autocannon is strength 10 AP 1 damage free. And it gets 6 shots at 36 inches or something. It is pretty good, all things considered. It is pretty good. It has some heavy bolters or last cannons. I would probably take the last cannons because they also get +1 AP against infantry. And in Ironstorm specifically, Predators are really good at just driving around, shooting something, and then holding objectives or something. Or they die and you traded a cheap piece. Because they're so cheap, and because they work well in Ironstorm, I'm putting them I'm putting them up in A tier. And I think the Intercessors will be the bottom of A, because I'm mad about it. The Repulsor Executioner. I started 1 year ago, I started a fight on Reddit because I said this thing is bad, and I said that because it is. The Repulsor Executioner doesn't have any good rules. It gets +1 to hit against units below half strength, which is a terrible ability. It never comes up because you don't need help killing something that's almost dead. If you use that ability at all, it's against knights maybe, or against like a horde. The Repulsor Executioner has to go into B tier, and I think it goes into B tier with the Centurions and the Assault Intercessors, maybe in front of them. It is good in Ironstorm because it gets the rerolls and it's a tank. It is a good target for lethal hits because it's one model with a lot of guns. It has long range, it gets all the Ironstorm buffs. The problem is it is still expensive. It only has a 3-up save, so it dies faster than any Land Raider. And it transports 6 models, which is basically useless. You only use that to hide like a unit of Intercessors for turn 1 against indirect fire, or maybe you could go for 3 Eradicators. The problem is it is a long-range tank that is also a transport, and a long-range tank usually doesn't want to drive forward into the enemy. So I'm putting it here because it's a bit confused. It doesn't have a good ability, but because it just has so many shots, I'm putting it into B because it's good enough in Ironstorm. The regular Impulsor. The regular Repulsor, excuse me. The regular Repulsor is interesting. It got buffed. It can now hold 14 models. And it has a bunch of bullets. It can have 2 last cannons, basically, which is some needed range damage. I think that's pretty good, in all honesty. Yeah, that's not bad, actually. The problem is, it is slower than a Land Raider, and it is not as tough as a Land Raider. It is, however, 100 points cheaper than a Redeemer, and a bit cheaper than a Crusader. I don't know what to make of this. I think I personally like the Crusader more, if you want a cheap transport, just because the Crusader is just tougher. The Repulsor is more mobile, in terms of where it can fit through, because it has a round base, and it pivots for free, but it is also 2 inches slower. So I think the Repulsor goes... I think objectively speaking, because it does more damage than the Crusader, it's better than it. I think I have to put it with the Hellblasters. It is basically the Hellblasters and the Repulsor are just worse than the Redeemer and the Aggressor, so if we do that, it kind of mirrors one tier below, but still completely playable. That's what I would do. Chief Librarian Tigorius. This guy has some of the best rules in the game. The problem is he doesn't join anything remotely relevant for these rules to use. Tigorius has a pretty good ranged attack. He gives his unit -1 to be hit always. He also gives them a 4-up against mortal wounds and psychic attacks, which makes the unit pretty tanky. And he allows you to use one of 4 stratagems for 0 CP, which is Heroic Intervention, Overwatch, Go to Ground, and Counter-Offensive. So that's pretty good. I like that. I think he is fine. He is not flawed, because he has one unit he can join, and that's pretty good. I'm just thinking where to put him. I think I'm putting him before the Assault Centurions. Yeah, I think right here. He goes into Blade Guard, and I think in Blade Guard he does a pretty decent job. I also think the Apothecary should go ahead of the Terminators, maybe. No, let's leave him here. Eliminators. Eliminators are the top of C tier. Why are Eliminators the top of C tier? Eliminators are genuinely a pretty good unit. They have an ability where if the Sergeant carries the Carbine, they can shoot and then move. So you can move, shoot, and then move back behind a wall. And the other 2 members of the unit have a damage-free Last Talon, which does some pretty decent damage, because there are a lot of the free wound models in the game. So that works. And they are also not easy, like they're not difficult to kill, but they do have stealth, so they are not easy to kill. They're like annoying to kill. You have to put something into them that is probably more expensive than they should be. Note I said should be. Because of an interaction that used to exist where these guys could shoot and then move into a transport and then the transport could shoot at the enemy, these guys got a hike of 10 points, so they're now at 85. And that rule no longer works. You can no longer get into the transport with your shoot after moving, which means they are now just overpaying for absolutely nothing. That's why I put them in C tier. They're not unplayable, they're not bad, they're just too expensive. If these guys go up to go down to like 70 points, I can easily see them like here. Like they're really good. They're just too expensive. Here we have the Impulsor. The Impulsor goes up into A tier. And I'm putting it probably in front of the Vindicator. Yeah, I think that's right. The Impulsor is the only transport that can carry a unit for cheap in the Primaris line. The Rhino can fit 10 models, but it can't transport Primaris Space Marines. The Impulsor can carry 6 models, but it can't carry... it can carry 7 models now, because it got buffed. But it can't carry Gravis models, or something like that. So what you can fit into an Impulsor is a unit of... For example, you could put Incursors in there to scout up. You can put Blade Guard with a character in there. So now Blade Guard has a additional vector of threat range, because now you can drive up and shoot something, and then you get out with the Blade Guard and hold the objective, or you just drive behind a wall and next turn you get out behind the wall and charge something. So the Impulsor is pretty good. I think it's good in the Gladius and maybe in the Ironstorm. Though I don't know what you put in there. It is noticeably worse than the Black Templar Impulsor because it doesn't have a multi-melter. But it does have a shield dome. It has a 5-up invulnerable save, and that is really, really good against like Eldar and Tau and any of these armies, because the Impulsor is genuinely difficult to kill. Even if you have like a real anti-tank unit, sometimes you just get lucky. And then the Impulsor just stands around after its unit got out, and then it does some actions, it scores secondary cards, it holds an objective. It's pretty good. I like the Impulsor. The Impulsor is pretty good. Speaking of Incursors, these guys are in C tier, and I'm putting them probably before the Librarian. So these guys are like infiltrators, but worse. They're 85 points. They ignore cover, but their guns are bad. They have sustained hits in melee, but their melee weapons are bad. They have a once per game ability to throw some mortal wounds at something, and it's a vehicle. It takes extra mortal wounds. That's pretty good. And if the incursors shoot something with their guns, your entire army gets +1 to hit against that target. That's conceptually a pretty good rule. The problem is just they're not battle line, they don't have infiltrate, they only have scout. And if you tag something to get +1 to hit against, they probably die in return. And they only have OC1, so they can't really hold ground. So I think C tier is right. They have some flaws, like the points and the damage, but they do have a role. They do a +1 to hit thing, which alleviates some of the pressure off of moment, which genuinely I like that. The Invictor Warsuit is unplayable. I'm putting it probably with the Reavers. No, I'm putting it in front of the Razorback, but after the Rhino. The Invictor Warsuit is a Dreadnought with toughness 8 and no -1 damage and no 2-up save. It's funny enough, it is strength 14, which used to say it was better at tank shocking than a Dreadnought. The problem is it has a bunch of guns that don't do anything. It has an ability that is useless. If you shoot a 4-boss unit, the Invictor suit can shoot back, which is not very useful at all, because the guns are bad. It can have a Flamer, which is kind of okay for having a unit that doesn't need Oath of Moment, but it lost Infiltrates in 9th edition, so now it has Scout for 10th edition, which is just worse. And one thing you could have considered is you deploy some of them on the line, and you scout up and charge your opponent, or if you go second, you redeploy them into reserves with the captain, and then you have them out of reserves with a flamethrower. The problem is that no longer works, because not only do you not know who has the first turn before you redeploy, the captain can now no longer redeploy an Invictor Warsuit, so... And it's expensive, so this thing just doesn't do anything. The Invader ATV. I'm putting this guy with the Tactical Marines because it's a similar kind of role. The Invader ATV is a mounted unit. Shoutouts to Stormlands. That will never happen. It has a multi-melter and some bolters, and it's fast. It can score some secondaries because it's fast. It's not bad at it. It's just not exciting about it. It is fast, so I give it a C tier ranking. In Ironstorm. It gets a reroll for the multi-melter, which is not bad, but in general you don't take it. The Firestrike servo turret is pretty funny. The Firestrike servo turret is honestly pretty funny because it is pretty durable. It is the cheapest vehicle you can buy to give your army a bring it down target, which means your opponent can't redraw the card in Pariah Nexus. It still moves 3 inches, so it's not stationary. It is just as good as stationary. It has a twin-linked Last Talon with d6 +1 damage, AP 3, which is not bad. And it overwatches on a 5-up. 75 points is also not that expensive. This thing is honestly not that bad. Like, it doesn't really have a flaw. It's more like you are not interested in taking it. So I think that puts it with the Terminator Librarian. So I think the servo turret is not bad. The Chaplain on Bike. The Chaplain on Bike gives his unit devastating wounds in shooting and +1 to wound in melee, and he only joins mounted units, which means exactly 1 unit for Ultramarines, which is Outriders. And Outriders are not great, so I'm putting them all with the ATV. And I think Tactical Marines go ahead of the ATV because they have battle line. So that's just what it is. Like in Stormlands, you get to do some stuff, but I don't think Stormlands is very good. So that's what it is. Let's get the Outriders out of the way too. I think the Outriders are the best of the three. Probably because these are cheap-ish bodies with lots of wounds, and they're fast, so they can do an action. They like advance and charge in the Gladius, so they can get in somewhere and move block, maybe. As a big unit with all three of these data sheets, they're way too expensive and don't do anything. So the problem is they're just worse than jump pack versions of the same unit. So yeah, that's just kind of how it is. Let me check again if I see some scouts here. The answer is no. There are no scouts in this tier list. Yeah, I will have to add some tier lists, add some scouts. You know what? I talked about them a lot. Let's add some scouts. Give me a second. Alright, welcome back to the tier list. Let's get scouts out of the way. Space Marine Scouts. These guys go into S tier. Scouts are incredible. Scouts are really, really good. They got worse in Pariah Nexus. They got worse before when they got more expensive, but I still think you take one unit of Scouts in every army you build. Scouts are cheap. They're 65 points for 10 wounds with a 4-up save, which in cover is the same thing as a 3-up save. They get a bunch of weapons which are completely irrelevant. You don't need shotguns anymore to do actions. At the end of your opponent's turn, if your opponent is not within 6 inches, Scouts can go back into reserve, so they can arrive from the board edges to do some actions and score secondary cards. They can beat up some other cheap units like Nurglings and... no, not Nurglings. Nurglings are a bit too tough. Like, something like Striking Scorpions or Mandrakes or something. Like, that's an even fight in terms of tabletop stats. If you get the drop on them, or like 10 cultists, you can probably win that fight. So you take these guys because they have Infiltrate and Scout. That means at the end of... that means you deploy these guys in the center of the board. If you go first, you move up, score something, and then stay in position. If you go second, you move back into a safe spot where you can't be shot, and then you go away at the end of your opponent's turn. So it is, the Infiltrate is good to block some armies like Votan and Space Wolves and World Eaters. And it's just a really good combination. Infiltrate Scout has always been good. They got a bit worse because of the actions thing, so you can't advance into actions and they're not battle line, but Scouts are still good. I'm not taking 3 units of them anymore, but I'm still taking 1 or 2. In every list. Doesn't matter what detachment. The Storm Speeders. This one will be pretty quick because I'm putting all 3 of them into C tier. And I think they're just about equal with the Incursors, and I'm putting them at 1 lower because they're just worse than the Incursors. So the Hail Strike is probably the best. No, the Hammer Strike is the best, which is this one, no, this one. And the Thunder Strike, whatever, it doesn't really matter. These 3 are all not great. So the Speeders are really fast, which is good. They are not easy to kill. They have like the stats of a Rhino with a bit more wounds, which is not bad. They have Deep Strike, so you can reserve them. And their abilities are pretty similar. If you shoot something with a Storm Speeder, you get an ability. The Hail Strike gives you +1 AP if the unit was infantry. The Thunder Strike gives you +1 to wound if the unit was a vehicle or monster. And the Hammer Strike gives you ignore cover. Doesn't matter what unit it is, and that's why I think the Hammer Strike is the best one. For 150. The problem with these is they don't do any damage. Their guns are bad. Their guns are so bad, and they are so expensive. 150 points for a buff and a fast body is not good enough. If these guys had better damage or were like 110 points, I could easily see them in B tier, but as things are right now, unfortunately not. The Gladiators. Let's start with the Valiant. So this one warrants a bit of discussion. The Valiant is in B tier. I'm putting it in front of the servo turret. The Valiant is basically just a bunch of Melter Shots and a Last Talon with a rule. I think it rerolls once to hit, or it gets +1 to hit against the closest vehicle or something. The Valiant is not awesome, but it is good in Firestorm. I think in the Firestorm it's better than the other two gladiators because it gets +1 strength and it wants to drive forward anyway to get the closest bonus thing. And it likes advance and shoot with its melters. So this one is an anti-tank or anti-monster model, and it gets better in the Firestorm. Otherwise, I think it's the worst gladiator, so I'm putting it here. The Gladiator Lancer is a ranged anti-tank weapon, and I have to put it in front of the Repulsor Executioner because I have an agenda. The Gladiator Lancer goes with the Phobos Librarian, I think, and the Redemptor. I think the Gladiator Lancer is good sometimes. It is a really good and really reliable anti-tank profile. It is good in Ironstorm. Maybe that's good enough to make it A tier, but I don't think so. The Lancer is pretty good at killing vehicles, except when it isn't. And the except when it isn't part is whenever you shoot at something with an invulnerable save. Invulnerable saves are the bane of this thing's existence, and you always need to run 2. One Lancer doesn't do a goddamn thing. It is just not good enough as a solo tank. You need to take 2. In the Ironstorm, it becomes really reliable because you get 2 rerolls instead of just 1. And if you play against something without invulns, like guard tanks and orcs or something, this thing becomes pretty good. Against Necrons and demons, it is pretty bad. So that's why I'm putting it with the Redemptor, because it's just as swingy as the Redemptor. But it might actually be A tier for being an Ironstorm. However, the Gladiator I'm putting in A tier is the Reaper, and the Reaper goes with, I would say here, behind the Impulsor, but in front of the other stuff. The Reaper is really, really good in Ironstorm. It likes lethal hits. It likes sustained hits. It likes the critical hit 5s for the sustained hits too, which is really good because it has so many shots. It doesn't care about the wound reroll that much, but it's there. Like it's better than like Templar, but it's there. It is 160 points for a hail of bullets. It does devastating wounds, which lets it consistently put some chip damage onto vehicles, even though that's not its target. And most importantly, the Gladiator Reaper is also good in the Gladius. And the reason why is because it likes Storm of Fire for +1 AP, ignore cover. It likes Oath of Moment, and it is one of the few things you can put into a unit from further than 18 inches. So I like my Reaper in the Gladius. I take 1. I like Reapers in the Ironstorm. I would take 3 every single time. And I think it's good enough to include if you expect some infantry-heavy armies. The thing is, not only is it good against something like 20 Orc Boys, because you probably kill like 15 of them, it is also not bad against Terminators, because you can, honestly, with the death wounds, you can kill like 1 or 2. And if you kill 1 or 2 Terminators, that is just a support for your other units. And that's just good enough, in my opinion. So the Reaper gets A for me, mostly because of Ironstorm. If it was just how I use it in Gladius, I would put it with the Reaper, but with the Lancer, but that's where I put the Reaper. Tech Marine. Tech Marine goes into A tier with the 2 tanks. I think it goes right after the 2 tanks. Tech Marines give a vehicle +1 to hit, and they give the vehicle D3 lost wounds back. The reason why it's an A tier is because of the Ironstorm, and in Ironstorm, only the Tech Marine can join a unit. Can carry an enhancement. All of the enhancements are, how do I say, they are pretty good even after they got nerfed, so you do want a Tech Marine in all of your games. Salutations, Vera. Very nice to see you. That's the Tech Marine. He's here because of Iron Storm, otherwise he would be like down here. But that's it. Assault Intercessors. Assault Intercessors are honestly pretty good. I think they go after the Impulsor, before the Impulsor. So Assault Intercessors are a battle line unit that helps you in the new Pariah Nexus, because you can do some mission rules and you can get War of Attrition. The Assault Intercessors have reroll wounds against units on objectives, and they also give that rule to their characters. So the captain I put over here really likes to go into Assault Intercessors, because now the 10 attacks at strength 10, AP 3, lands, damage 2, death wounds now reroll wounds if you attach him to Assault Intercessors. So that's the thing. Good combination. I'm putting them here. If they weren't battle line, I would put them lower, but in the Gladius I always take them. And in the Vanguard, it is between these guys and these guys. You either take Assault Intercessors or regular Intercessors. It depends on what you are into. If you want to make your objective sticky before you teleport out, you take Intercessors. If you want the Uriel Ventress units to have some counterpunch, you take Assault Intercessors, and that's it. You can also easily take 2 units if you feel like it. You can take 1 unit with a Chaplain, 1 unit with the Captain, and then just push some OC2 into your opponent. It's not bad. Blade Guard Veterans. These guys got a massive buff because they can finally get into an Impulsor with their 7 model limit, because previously they could not. Previously, if you took 6 Blade Guard, the Impulsor was full and you couldn't attach a character. Blade Guard Veterans are interesting. They have a 4-up invuln, which is really good. They have a damage 2 power sword, which unfortunately is only strength 5, so you do bounce off of vehicles. And you do get 4 attacks, which is fine, but it's not amazing. They hit on freeze, and they have their choice of, you can either reroll once to hit, which makes them good without Oath of Moment, and it also buffs any attached characters like chaplains or captains, because they give them the reroll once to to hit. The problem is the captain has to take a bad weapon if he joins the Blade Guard, so maybe you take a lieutenant instead. It's a bit whack. It's a bit weird. I think I'm putting them right here. I think they're a bit more dubious than Hellblasters, but they're not like terrible. I think if you want to take them, they're pretty fine, and I put Tigurius here, and Tigurius joins them, so that makes sense to me in my head. The other rule is you can reroll once for your invulnerable saves, and because they only have a 3-up save instead of a 2-up, that means you use the 4-up quite frequently, so you get the reroll once, and if you stack that with the -1 to hit from Tigurius, you have a pretty durable unit that isn't very expensive. 255 points gets you a unit of 6 with Tigurius. That's not bad. Not bad at all. Eradicators. I don't know if this is going to be contentious, but I'm doing it anyway. Eradicators are up here. Eradicators are good in every detachment except Iron Storm. Eradicators are good in the Gladius because you put Fire Discipline on them and they just melt any tank you can possibly conceive of. With Fire Discipline, they just kill any tank in the game. In the Vanguard, they are probably your best unit for Maneos Calgar to lead. And outside of that, in the Anvil Siege Force, they have Heavy, so they get +1 to wound. They are your most reliable anti-tank, even though it's short-ranged, because they have full rerolls to hit and wound and damage against vehicles. So even a unit of 3 can easily kill a small vehicle like a Rhino in one shot. Something like an Eldar Warwalker or what else? A truck Something in that baseline. And sometimes they punch up. I like them as a rapid ingress threat. So that's one thing. What else? The problem is that S tier. I put them into every single list I write, but not everyone does. I think they're ahead of Inceptors, but I would like to put them here, but I think if I look at it objectively, they can't be an S tier. But I take them in every list. I take them over captains personally, but I'm putting the captain here just because he's that good. Captain. So, we don't have much to do. Heavy intercessors. These guys go probably into B tier. The problem is where. It's tough to be an Ultramarine. It is really tough to be an Ultramarine. So where do we put the heavy intercessors? They're probably the worst of the battle line units outside of tactical marines, because tactical marines are dubious. Heavy intercessors are tough. You can think about taking a unit of 10 in Anvil Siege Force, because they get +1 to wound if they're standing still. They get a 6-up Fear No Pain. They have an ability to get double OC if you stay still. They are really tough and not that expensive for how many wounds per model you get. The problem is they still don't do much damage, and I think sticky objectives is better at defending a home point, and 12-inch no deep strike is also better at defending a home point. I'm putting them in B tier, and I think I'm putting them with the Gravis Captain. Somewhere around here. I think it is telling. Sometimes I have 100 points left in my list and I want a battle line unit, so I take intercessors. And I could take heavy intercessors, but I want the sticky objective more than their ability. Their ability with +1 save against damage 1 is really good if you attach Manius Calgar, because then his bodyguards get the same rule and that makes them really tanky. So in Anvil Siege Force they're probably A tier, otherwise they're B, like mid-B. I think it's close. You can easily take them, I wouldn't fault you for it if you want a durable unit on your home objective, but I think the other two are slightly more useful here. Uriel Ventris. Uriel Ventris is in A tier. He is really, really good. The question is, where do I put him? He is a staple in Vanguard, so I'm putting him below the Centurions, but you can use him outside of Vanguard, so I'm putting him ahead of Centurions. Alright, that's how we go. Uriel Ventris is a book character. He is my favorite captain. He's the best Ultramarine. And he gives one of your units the ability to deep strike. Any infantry unit in your army gets the deep strike ability. In the Vanguard, that means you can give the Centurions deep strike, you can move them back into reserve and back in anywhere on the board instead of being around the board edges, and then they shoot their last cannons and then they go back, so that's really good. He doesn't need to lead the unit to give them deep strike, he just picks a unit to give them deep strike to. That can also be used in the Gladius, so you can deep strike your aggressors or your Hellblasters or something else. You can deep strike Assault Centurions. Here we go. You can rapid ingress a unit of Assault Centurions and charge something with a 5-inch charge, or an advanced charge even. So that works. He himself, he is a combat character. He is worse than a captain because he doesn't have the once per game super swing, but his sword is pretty good. It is strength 6, sustained hits 1. So he should hit all of his 6 attacks. So he has more attacks than the fist of the captain. And he doesn't need to pop an ability to use it. Uriel Ventris unfortunately doesn't get a free stratagem. He instead allows you to use stratagems while battle shocked, which has come up for me in the past, but it is a lot worse now that you can't use the same stratagem twice. Still, I think he is in A tier because he is in the Vanguard. He is almost an auto-include. I don't think he is quite an auto-include, but he's really close. I always take him, but you don't need to. However, he's also useful outside of the Vanguard. He can go into the Gladius and the Anvil Siege Force, and he does some good stuff there. And even the Firestorm. You can Rapid Ingress and Deep Strike a unit of Flamestorm aggressors and start torching people. That's pretty good. The Hammerfall Bunker is unplayable because it's a building. Move on. The Stormhawk Interceptor and the Siphon whatever are also unplayable because they're airplanes. I don't need to talk about that. The Stormraven is... Oh, wait a second. The Stormraven is actually pretty decent. And the Stormraven is basically a flying Land Raider. It doesn't have a 2-up save, it only has a 3-up, but it does have -1 damage. It doesn't have to be an aircraft, you can hover it. With the new rules about overhanging from the base, that is actually easier to move. It got more expensive. People used it in Ironstorm for the rerolls. I think in Stormlands it is pretty interesting for the stratagems. I think I'm putting it with the Crusader. Yeah, let's put it with the Crusader. Because that's where you would use it. Probably. You transport a unit. You can transport a Dreadnought, which is not bad. And it has some decent guns. Not amazing guns, but it has decent guns. So I'm putting it in B tier. It's not terrible. The point increase didn't help. The company heroes. These guys used to be really, really awesome. And then Pariah Nexus came and added the battle line keyword. I have a Vanguard Spearhead with 1985 points, and I could replace my intercessors with company heroes, but I really can't, because I need battle line. Especially in the Vanguard. They are the best bodyguard for a unit, for a captain, if you just happened to take a captain. They don't buff his output, but they make him tanky. So how the company heroes work: they're a cheap unit for 95 points of 4 models with 4 wounds each. So you get 16 wounds out of less than 100 points. You get various abilities. The guy with the sword has precision and 6 attacks. The guy with the heavy bolter does 3 damage. The guy with the rifle has devastating wounds. And the guy with the banner gives you +1 OC. And when a character is attached to the unit, which you have to do, otherwise it dies, the unit is always -1 to be wounded. That's a really good defensive buff, and it is really good with 2 characters. With Uriel Ventress in the Vanguard, if you just want a tanky unit in your backline to do something, to hold your backfield and then come out and brawl and keep Uriel alive, it is a 170 point unit, which I said was too expensive with the Librarian, but it is also a really durable unit that can go into midboard. Where this unit also shines is in the Gladius, if you put them with Marneus Calgar, or in the Ironstorm with Marneus Calgar. If you just want Marneus Calgar to be alive and give you the extra command point the entire game, putting him in the company heroes makes him really tough. You are now -1 to be wounded. You can still put saves on the Victrix Guard, or you can treat the company heroes as extra wounds for the Victrix Guard. And the champion from the company heroes has a very similar attacking profile to the Victrix. So it's damage 2, AP 2, so they get along pretty nicely. All in all, this is a really good unit, but it got slightly worse because of Pariah Nexus. So where do I put them? Probably with the heavy intercessors. That's probably where I'm putting them. Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's fine. These guys are not a unit you can always take. You take them sometimes. And that sometimes is whenever Marneus Calgar isn't leading a unit of Gravis Marines. And sometimes, maybe, you just stop caring about battle line and you just take them with Uriel like you did before. Desolation Marines are almost... No, they are unplayable, actually. But by my definition of the tier list, they are not unplayable. They're just really, really flawed. So what do Desolation Marines do? Desolation Marines have an indirect blast weapon. Two, actually. They have two indirect blast weapons. They have an anti-tank missile that is, like, okay. It's not great, but it's fine. And the problem is these guys were really, really good at the end of 9th edition and at the beginning of 10th edition. And they got nerfed. Super hard. They can't have any leaders to give them lethal hits, so they rely purely on hitting and wounding normally, which makes them worse with new Oath of Moment. You can no longer take 10 units in 10 models in one unit. You are locked to 5, and 5 of these guys are 200 points. I really like how they look. I think Desolation Marines are actually really funny. I love the models. I had a lot of fun painting them, and I had fun using them to make my opponents miserable. But unfortunately, they're just not good enough. The problem is with the new nerf that indirect fire only hits on 4s. Which previously these guys hit on 2s or 3s with indirect fire. Now they hit on 4s and they didn't get cheaper, so... Desolation Marines are so close to being unplayable, but they technically do something that has a purpose. They are an anti-tank unit with long range, and they have indirect fire, which none of the things down here do. They're just too expensive, which keeps them back. Sternguard Veterans. Sternguard Veterans go in the same category as, I would say, Incursors. Yes, this is a shame. Sternguard Veterans at the beginning of 10th were probably up in A or S tier. They were incredible. They have combi weapons to do devastating wounds against infantry. They really liked fire discipline to get extra hits out of their guns. And then they rerolled wounds, and then if they killed something, they got to shoot again. So what you used to do is you would aim like 2 models out of your 10-man squad at some surviving trash, like two cultists. And then you shot 8 guys at something like Terminators. You killed the cultists, and now you got to shoot again. And then you killed the Terminators because now 10 of them shoot the Terminators. That was really good. Now, Oath of Moment no longer rerolls wounds, so the death wounds from the combi weapons are inconsistent. And they also lost the ability to shoot twice, and instead gained the ability to reroll once to wound if they're shooting the Oath of Moment target. This is a terrible ability, and it doesn't do anything. These guys are so bad, the only thing that is good about them is they're cheap, and they do have a lot of attacks in melee. Surprisingly, each Sternguard veteran has 4 attacks. That's a lot of attacks. So we're putting them... Should they be lower than the speeders? Probably. Yeah, they should be lower than the speeders. Assault Intercessors with jump packs. These guys are really good. I'm putting them... with the infiltrate. No, probably here. Assault Intercessors with jump packs are really good. I never actually... So what they do, they have attacks in melee against infantry, so they will kill 5 Eldar or 10 cultists, no problem. When they charge something, you do some mortal wounds, which is fine. They have the grenade keyword, which is good. They have deep strike, which is good. And they move 12 inches, which is really good, because in Pariah Nexus you need fast units to do actions. And these guys will do the actions. Honestly, I think popular consensus, these guys should be like here. I think some people would argue they should be up here, but I'm not quite that high on them. Still, I think they're really good. I think they're incredible for the new missions. And honestly, in my games, they usually never charge anything. Usually they just do an action, get me some victory points, and then they die. But in that case, they're cheap. They're 80 points. They're so cheap. So I'm putting them right here. The captain with jump pack goes... I think he's better. He's better than the chaplain with jump pack by an entire tier. So I'm putting him up here with... I think he might actually be here with the Centurions. Here's the reason why. You probably never attach the jump pack captain to a unit, because the jump pack units are better without a character. So what do we do? I think the Vanguard veterans need to go higher, because they're basically just worse versions of the jump pack intercessors, but that's fine. So they're going here. So what does the jump pack captain do? When leading a unit, the unit gets +1 strength. That's like nice to have, but whatever. What this guy actually does, he is pretty neat at carrying enhancements. The captain with jump pack can have a storm shield and a hammer, which means he now has that gives him a 6th wound and a 4 involve. No, he has one. The shield gives him a 6th wound, and he moves 12 inches. So he does actions just like the intercessors, and he can carry an enhancement. For example, you could give him like the Gravis captain. Honestly, these guys are so similar. I'm putting them next to each other. I talked myself into it. The Gravis captain and the guy. You know what? The chaplain goes down below these two. I think you want these two for fun more than the chaplain. Though the chaplain isn't bad. But it's worse than the Gravis captain. So basically you get a less durable Gravis captain because you don't have the half damage in the toughness 6. But what you get is you get movement 12. And you could give this guy the Artificer armor to make him tougher to kill, 2-up save, 5-up invuln. You could give him the Shadow Weave cloak to make him a lone op. And you still get the ability to use a stratagem for free. So you can just charge something, pay 0 command points for Epic Challenge, and then kill a character in a unit. With your Devastating Wounds Thunderhammer. Like, it could easily happen. Like, I can definitely see it. I think this guy is, like, right here. Yeah, I think he's not bad. I think he's not bad. Just as a solo character. Kind of like there. Regular Terminators. Regular Terminators are one entire tier below Assault Terminators. I would say here. I feel comfortable putting them here. Terminators are really tough. Terminators have a lot of shots. Terminators have Deep Strike, and that's where all of their rules end. They have a lot of shots, but their ranged weapons are bad. It's just bolters. They don't have anything really good except for 2 missiles. Their fists in combat are like fine, but they're just worse in combat than assault intercessors and aggressors. So they're basically just worse aggressors with an invuln save. And that's what it is. The problem with Terminators, the models look so good, and all they need is the first company detachment to get rules. And that's what it is. All they need is the first company detachment to get better rules. And suddenly they would be popping off, I think. So sadly, their flaw is they just don't do enough damage, and they're expensive. The Astraeus. The Astraeus is really, really funny. I'm putting the Astraeus in the same tier as like the servo turret. Because it is a big Lord of War. It is a big Forge World tank for the Primaris Space Marines. You can make it work in Ironstorm by giving it the lethal hits. You get the rerolls, you get the sustained hits. You basically just build a list around putting all of your buffs into the Astraeus and then shooting people with it. It is unfortunately only AP1, and its special rule is kind of bad, but that's where it's the best. It is still a big vehicle. In some formats it can be fine, so let's put it right here. That's where I would take it. The Chaplain in Terminator armor. This guy goes right here with the Assault Terminators. He gives the Assault Terminators +1 to wound, which helps them do damage with their Strength 8 Thunderhammers. He gives them a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds and devastating wounds, which means your 4-wound Thunderhammer guys are now tougher. So this actually makes this a pretty compelling package to include in some lists, like the Vanguard or the Gladius. So yeah, it's not bad. You get a really tough unit out of it that can punch up if it needs to. And your opponent can't just kill it for free. Because 4 damage weapons are in short supply. So I think that's fine. I think that's pretty good. Chaplain gets it. The Captain in Phobos armor. This guy is interesting. He gives his units the ability to move these 6 inches after he shoots. And he has all the keywords. He has Infiltrate, Scout, and Deep Strike. So he can join Reavers, he can join Incursors, and he can join Infiltrators to do some stuff. He's only 55 points, so he's the cheapest way to carry a Vect enhancement on the Vanguard. And he has Deep Strike, so you can just Deep Strike a 12-inch aura of +1 command points for your opponents, which is pretty okay. He can also Deep Strike and take an objective against something weak, because he still has 6 attacks sitting on 2s, which is not bad. I think the regular Phobos Lieutenant goes with the Chaplain. Or maybe with Tigorius. Something like here. If you can't afford a better character to carry the enhancement in Vanguard, you take him. Using him to buff up a Phobos unit is probably not worth it. The Lieutenant with Combi Weapon. This guy is honestly really, really good. He is a lone operative, which have gotten better in Pariah Nexus, because they can't get sniped by Thousand Suns anymore, and a lot of the actions in the game require you to stay alive for an entire battle round, which if you have lone op, you can easily do. He has a reactive move, which he can't use when doing an action, but if your opponent tries to get him, he just walks away, and in the Vanguard, he can walk away again. He can also carry the +1 command point aura, which makes him really annoying to deal with. He also has Infiltrate, but not Scout. So where do we put him? I think he's an A tier, and I think it's not even close. I think he actually goes with the Infiltrators, because it's the same kind of unit. One 5-man unit of Infiltrators and the Phobos Lieutenant will screen your entire deployment zone. He gives you... Oh, and he also selects 1 objective marker on the board. And your entire army rerolls once to wound against that objective marker. So that's fun. He also has a 5-up Feel No Pain, so he's pretty difficult to kill. And unfortunately, his combat output is pretty weak. He always disappoints me when he has to charge anything, even if it's like 2 cultists or something. He always fails. But other than that, he is really, really good. I'm putting him here. In Vanguard, he is an auto pick. In the Gladius, you can think about it. And in every other detachment, he is your lone op. If you don't want an assassin, you take him. So here we go. The Apothecary Biologist. I will make this real quick. This is the best unit in the Codex. This guy is in basically every detachment. It is not close. He is in every list I build because I always take a Gravis unit with extra stuff. He is good in Anvil Siege Force because he can carry all the enhancements. He is good in Vanguard because he allows you to infiltrate a Gravis unit. He's good in Gladius because he gives you the Fire Discipline, Eradicator, or Aggressors. He is good in like that. Okay, that's it. Like 4 detachments he's good in. And you always take him if you have a big Gravis unit. Like, I think he isn't great in the Firestorm just because there are no enhancements for him to take. In the Iron Storm, you don't take Gravis units, so it doesn't matter. And that's kind of what it boils down to. So he's good in 3 detachments. And you always take him in those free detachments. You never leave him at home. It is not even close. So I'm putting him in S tier. I think in Ultramarines specifically, you probably take Calgar more. So it's probably like this, but I am really tempted to just swap them. Like that. Just because in other... The Space Wolves can't take this guy, and this is a serious downside of playing Space Wolves. That's how good he is. Like, if you own this guy, he's one of the best looking models in Space Marines, and he's really, really good. I think just to make a statement, I'm putting this guy in S tier in front of Calgar. Yeah, but no, but in Ultramarines, Calgar has to be the best. Yeah, he's one of the best looking models in the game. That's completely right. He's also important. I think Calgar being good in every detachment and him only being in free for Ultramarines specifically makes him second place. But it is so close. It is really close between these two. If you don't play Ultramarines, you still take him, but you can't take Calgar. That's the difference. The Ballistus Dreadnought. The Ballistus Dreadnought goes right after the Lancer, but it's worse than the Lancer. Here's why. The Ballistus Dreadnought doesn't need Oath of Moment because it rerolls wounds against something that isn't half dead, which is a good rule. It has a 2-shot last cannon and a 2-shot missile launcher with d6 damage. So it is anti-tank, it is just not reliable anti-tank. But it is a tough model with a 2-up save and Armor of Contempt access, and that's all it needs to be. In the Iron Storm, it gets better, because you get a reroll to your wound rolls. In addition, it is worse than the Lancer, but it's cheaper than the Lancer. So I think these two are completely even, depending on what you want. If you try to be serious about your anti-tank, you take the Lancer. If you just want to have something in your backline with more than 14 inches of range, you take the Ballistus Dreadnought. And here we go, the last datasheet for the tier list. And I hope I didn't miss anything. I really hope I didn't miss something important. Is the Terminator Captain. The Terminator Captain gives his unit reroll to charges, which is not bad. And he can carry all the enhancements in first company. And unfortunately, he goes right here. Behind the Terminators, because he is way too expensive. You can use a free stratagem on your Terminators, which is fine. Oftentimes, it is the same thing as +1 to wound as the Chaplain in Gladius, but he is like 100 points for like the Chaplain is 80 points, this guy is 100, and you don't really get anything out of him. He also doesn't protect your Terminators from devastating wounds. And he doesn't really hit harder than the Chaplain either. Like a bit, but not that much. It's just how it is. Yeah, it's just how it is. He just like the Terminators, he just waits for the +1 to wound. That's basically what it boils down to. Alright. Suppressors. Suppressors are not great. And I'm putting them in the exact same spot as Vanguard Veterans, Incursors, somewhere around here. They have a purpose, and that purpose is they have a ranged attack and they fly 12 inches. The problem is they're just too expensive and they don't do enough damage. That's the main problem with suppressors, so I put them here. These are also the models I was talking about with the 85-point deep strike unit. I would rather have 3 suppressors than 5 reavers, because at least theoretically suppressors could hit something and then it has -1 to hit me back. The Blade Guard Ancient. This guy goes probably close to being unplayable. I'm putting him in C tier, and the only reason why I'm not pushing him into unplayable is because he is the cheapest model in the Codex at 45 points. And he can carry enhancements for Manius Kelgar. And this is the big difference here. If I have Marnie's Kelgar in a unit of Blade Guard, for example, I don't really want to take a Lieutenant, because a Lieutenant would give me a redundant rule, which is fall back and charge and fall back and shoot, because I already get that from Kelgar. So instead, I would probably rather have the Ancient, so all the Blade Guard veterans have OC2, and once per game, Kelgar and the Victrix Guard and all the Blade Guard get +1 attack. That would probably be the only use case I can see for taking an Ancient over a Captain and Lieutenant, or Captain or Lieutenant and nothing, or Captain and nothing because of transport. So in First Company or Vanguard, if I wanted to take Kelgar, probably take the Ancient. Otherwise, he doesn't have a purpose. Infernus Marines. These guys go straight next to Incursors here. I think they're worse because they don't scout and they don't have a good rule. These guys have Flamethrowers, which are Strength 5, which is honestly pretty good. And they auto-hit, so they do Overwatch pretty well. They are cheap at 80 points, so they don't cost anything. The problem is just they're not fast, they don't have Assault. They don't really do anything special, they don't do a lot of damage. In Firestorm, they lost the ability to use Death Wounds for 0 CP, which wasn't good on them anyway, because they don't have Twin Linked to get rerolls on it, so they're just right here. Their rule is not good enough, their damage is not good enough. They're just flawed, they just don't do anything. Yeah, they aren't B tier because they are just better damage units in B tier, and they are just worse than... I think 5 Infernus Marines are just worse than 3 Flamestorm Aggressors, and you wouldn't take either of these, so that's fine. Captain Sicarius. Captain Sicarius, I don't like him, but that doesn't mean anything for the tier list. I think he goes behind the Terminators. No, he goes with the Terminator library. Sicarius is basically just a worse version of Tigorius in terms of, or a captain in terms of, let's give Blade Guard a minor buff. He gives his unit Scouts, which is fine, and once per game he gets to move when something moves within 9 inches, which is not terrible, but it's like it's pretty good, but it's not good enough. His damage is also just not the best. Like it's fine. He's worse than a captain. I think he's also worse than Uriel in terms of his damage profile, and that's just what it is. Okay. Then we have 2 more. The Terminator Ancient. He goes with the captain, I think. The Terminator Ancient has one purpose, and that is to get 2 enhancements into a Terminator squad. So you can have the captain and the Ancient in 10 Assault Terminators, and then you have 2 enhancements, so you could go you could go 5 up Feel No Pain and +1 attack, which is probably pretty good. If that detachment had any play. +1 OC, he gives +1 to hit if your squad is wounded, and +1 to wound if it's half dead, which is not a good rule. +1 OC is a good rule, but not good enough to justify having another character in the unit. So I'm putting him right here. I think he goes up a bit because the Terminator enhancements are better, but I'm speculating here. The Judicia. This guy is pretty good, actually. I'm putting him right with the Blade Guard. Right behind the Blade Guard. Judicia Blade Guard gives... the Judicia is precision with a damage 2 weapon. That has a pretty good profile. And the Judicia gives his unit fight first. So if you get charged, you just get slapped in the face by the Judicia. That's pretty good, actually. The Judicia can carry the Honor Vehement, so if you don't want... The Judicia can carry the Honor Vehement, so if you don't want a captain, you can take the Judicia instead. It is debatably better than a captain in specifically Blade Guard, because the captain can't have a fist, but I probably still want a captain for all of the stratagems you can take. It is close. This is a perfectly fine unit combination. I probably wouldn't take a Judicia in any other unit. And he competes with Tigorius, and I think in a comparison, he is better than Tigurius. Yeah, if you want to go Ultramarine specific, take Tigurius. If you want to have the best unit possible, take the Judicia. So that's where I am. And that should be it. That should finally be all the Space Marine datasheets ranked from best to worst. And I hope to see you next time. For courage and honor, we march for McCraig.